Productive Disruption is a podcast presented by Rhodes Branding, spotlighting bold and innovative ideas that have the ability to reshape K-12 education. If you're looking for actionable ideas about how to operate and innovate your school, you've come to the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of Productive Disruption. I'm your host, Molly McGowan-Gorsuch, and I'm the Director of Client Engagement at Rhodes Branding. This month, we've been discussing the superintendent's role in recruitment and retention, providing takeaways that school and district leaders can incorporate into their 2024 strategies. Joining me today is a superintendent who knows a thing or two about attracting and keeping qualified educators and staff. Superintendent of Brighton Central Schools in Rochester, New York, Dr. Kevin McGowan is also the 2023 National Superintendent of the Year, which is a designation awarded annually by AASA, which is the School Superintendents Association, at its annual conference, which is actually coming up February 15th to the 17th in California. Dr. McGowan, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, Molly, my pleasure. Really glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
And I do have to say, I joked about this before, but I really do like your last name.
I think yours is fantastic too.
Thanks. That's why I kept it in there. So to provide some perspective on the insights you're sharing today, can you please tell us how long that you've served as superintendent of Brighton Central Schools?
Sure thing, Molly. I have been the superintendent here in Brighton for 15 years. Prior to working here, though, I was superintendent as well in the Warsaw Central School District in Wyoming County, a smaller, more rural area, and a principal before that in a more suburban district. I mention that because each of those places bring with it different dynamics in terms of recruitment, retention, and different types of challenges that we've had to think about throughout my experiences.
Absolutely. What are some of the biggest differences that you've noticed from being in those different regions and those different spaces as a superintendent, because you do have quite a history of leadership?
Sure. Well, I think the most obvious one that would be clear to people is just number of people, right? So in a more rural area, you will tend to get far fewer applicants just by the nature of perhaps the area you're in being a little bit more remote. Less population is there. That would probably then translate to less people applying. And in the hard to reach subject areas, we find that there's an entirely different number of people, different capacity, different, well to go to. I would also point out that one of the issues tends to be place and the types of applicants relative to the place you're in and capacity of those places, both in terms of resources, but also the community and what people are thinking about in terms of where they want to live. It presents particular challenges around diversifying your staff.
That's something that we talked about earlier on this podcast, was location, and how sometimes it's about framing that the correct way, because, I also live in a pretty rural area, and some of the fears, I guess, around hiring here, saying folks from the big cities might not want to work here. We're just a small rural area. Well, you don't know that. You may be exactly what that person is looking for, but it's about putting out your pros and saying what really sets us apart. And, you do have something to offer. It's just about really framing it in the right way. So I like that you're bringing that up as well. But thinking about your experience, like you said, you've been in it for longer than 15 years. You've got a personal perspective on the importance of retention, as a person who's been retained, and that's especially relevant today, I know, given the recent superintendent exodus that we saw following the pandemic. So I'm curious, from a personal perspective, what were some of those aspects that initially drew you to Brighton? And in those past 15 years you've been there, what factors have influenced your own reasons to stay?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I like how you frame that. I think that, first of all, as I mentioned, the type of place that somebody's at in terms of being a more rural place, I don't think rural, urban, suburban environments are better or worse, on the whole, or just measured against each other. I think it is entirely a personal preference, a personal desire. My family and I have 3 kids. At the time, I only had 2 kids when I was in a more rural area. Had a wonderful, wonderful experience living in that area. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. It is a particular way of life, right? Living in a city is a particular way of life. I've got one of my kids now lives in a big city. I enjoy visiting that. I enjoy being around. I might enjoy living in that. I'm not sure. I enjoy the time that I spend visiting New York City in particular. And where I am right now and in a suburban area, I can get really to anything I need to very, very quickly. And it's all kind of at my fingertips. In Warsaw, I had a well. Here I'm on county water. Like there's all these different things, right? And I don't at all look down on it or uplift one over the other. It is entirely about a personal preference. However, we also know that it is about what's available to you that fits your life, that people will gravitate towards. So in our own recruitment of particular candidates that better represent the kids that they serve, we've had to really think about how do you make sure it's clear to people that they will have at their disposal what is most important to them or what is just part of life for an individual that they would like to really participate in. So, faith tradition and, personal care and the types of things people prefer around restaurants and socialization, whatever it is, you have to really make sure it's clear to people that, hey, we've got this capacity, and if this is something you're interested in. I work in a community that has a large Jewish population. I know when recruiting rabbis within the different congregation, there's a conversation around access to kosher food. And, is there a kosher bakery? Is there a place to purchase Judaica, right? Like the things that people would like in their household. These are all the types of things that people in the recruitment process are thinking about. And essentially, do I want to make a life in this place? Well, for me, it was the same thing. Now, for me, do I want to make a life in this place is a school professional conversation that is intimately related. So as a parent, it was important to me to live in the district that I was working in. That, again, is a very personal decision for superintendents in different ways, and different districts have different take on residency requirements, et cetera. But for me, it was always going to be about being in the place that I was going to work. As a dad, as a professional, those two decisions were going to be hand in hand. And my wife, also an educator, it was 100% all in on that. Now, listen, there's pros and cons to living in that place. My kids will tell you the relentless pursuit of snow days by their friends and classmates, certainly had its impact. However, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And being a part of my kids' education in that way and invested in that way is a big part of my professional practice. So for me, looking particularly at my second superintendency, really shopping in a very different way than my first. Frankly, I was, very, very young in my first superintendency. It was my first one. It was, my wife and I didn't ask a lot of the kinds of questions that we asked the second time. And I don't regret that either, by the way, because that was such a great experience. But you come to the table with a little bit of a different perspective after you've been doing the job a little while. So you look at the district differently. I requested different kinds of documents. I did a different kind of review and scan of the district than I would have otherwise done. But for me, it also at that point was about my kids and their ages. So in the first superintendency, my kids were, let's say, like 1 and 4 when I was looking. Well, now all of a sudden I was looking and they were 7 and 4. And they had already now, my 4-year-old was in a preschool program, but my 7-year-old had been in school. So now I'm thinking differently as a parent about the school experience. And if these two things are going to go together, I'm looking at differently. So my review of Brighton, having been a traditionally very high achieving place, very well regarded, kind of the chance to play for the Yankees, and then take with that, the type of place that we wanted to live relative to a suburban atmosphere, and being close to things. And the neighborhood that I'm in, the community I'm in, is very similar to the one I grew up in, and was very comfortable for me that way. It really replicates that experience, which is something I wanted, and we wanted with our kids too. Finally, I'll say this: we hunted this place, in the sense that my wife and I, when the opening came up and it was presented to me by several colleagues, you should look at this, you should look at this, you should look at this. We came here multiple times, very much as just, human beings, members of the public. And we went to a musical here. We went to concerts here. I went to games here. I immersed myself before I ever even applied or made any reference to applying. I immersed myself in what it would be like to be here, because I needed to understand what kinds of kids would my kids be around, what kind of staff would they engage with, what kind of environment was it. And so I was really looking for that. So, the overall picture of it was, do I want to live here? Do I want to be a part of this? What kind of quality of life is it for me? And the retention piece for me is that it has continued to be that, right? So it's the place where we made our home. It's the place where we are embraced, challenged, invigorated, inspired all the time, and continue to be 15 years later, which is why I continue to be excited about doing the work. It's the place that I want my kids. I have a deep and abiding dedication and commitment to the people in this community and the staff that we work with, the community members that they're around. And frankly, I think it's the best for my children and my family and for us to be around. So that's why I continue to be retained.
So I want to highlight some of the words that you actually use in your description there. You mentioned you were shopping and you did choose to immerse yourself. And I think that is really important, because right now there's definitely a need for K-12 to understand that they're people who are coming into your school doors. They are shopping, they are consumers, and they are savvy shoppers. So they're going about things a different way. And so while you very clearly took a proactive stance in going, and like you said, going to the musical and immersing yourself in the community. But for maybe those folks who aren't that proactive, or who may not know those opportunities exist, I feel like you and other districts are making it more apparent how to become involved. And I think that is a key element of recruitment. What are some of the ways that you and your district, and you can recommend other districts do to do that kind of work? Say, hey, come in, here are these opportunities for those who may not be actively or as savvy a shopper as you were when you decided and knew that you wanted to come to the superintendency.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important for people to sit back and reflect on maybe some of the power dynamic and the notion of a relationship. So, I happen to enjoy a wonderful and positive and very blessed marriage, and a solid relationship, and many solid professional relationships, and incredible board. But I would say one thing I've learned over time about relationships is the importance for trust, the importance of kindness, the importance of grace, the importance of just, really being invested and present with that person. And I mention that because the kind of the old traditional model of hiring and recruitment and retention, there was this power dynamic, right? Like, you were lucky if that organization hired you. You were lucky if they took 30 seconds to read your resume. You were, really incredibly fortunate if they chose you. Well, yeah, those things may all be true, but it creates almost this power dynamic that you probably wouldn't necessarily describe as healthy in a personal relationship, right? Like, marriages, friendships, other professional relationships should be built on mutuality and connection with each other. And, each person playing a probably equal to some degree role in a relationship, as opposed to a dominating and, overbearing role. We know those aren't really healthy relationships. Well, professionally, we should maybe think about it the same way. There's an opportunity for us to invite a connected, deep, equal relationship with people. And I think that empowers them, that helps them feel like they're part of the solution, they're part of the organization, they're part of making things better for kids, not that they're just, so fortunate that you chose them. Frankly, we're fortunate that they choose us. And let's not forget that, right? Like, let's keep that in mind. If you take that attitude into it, I think you're likely to treat people better. You're likely to make it a better workplace. There is always a power dynamic in employer-employee relationship. I'm not foolish enough or naive enough to think that that doesn't exist. But I also think we try to really recognize the fact that we are fortunate that people are wanting to come to us. And let's nurture that. Let's cherish that. Let's be aware of that. So then in the process, let's treat people well. When they contact us, when they're reaching out for information, let's give it to them. Let's call them back. Let's think about the notes we sent and the letters and the phone calls and the way we invite people into the conversation, and, kindness and compassion, and be thoughtful in the questions that we ask, and then the feedback that we give. Like, let's just look at it as, how would we want to be treated when we walk in the door? And what kind of message does that send to people? It shouldn't be a gotcha game. It should be let's explore this and think about whether or not this relationship is going to work for both of us. even in the final interview, there's a lot of wide open questions that I ask with myself and whatever other senior administrators part of that conversation that really allow for a conversation, allow for that person to determine whether or not they want to be a part of us as well. We also try and make sure that our communications in all ways are really clear, that there's a lot of information on our website, because we have a lot of people that come into the interview process say, on your website, I saw this and I noticed this. And we really want to make sure that they have a good handle on who we are as they're walking in and deciding, is this the place that I want to be a part of? There's a high expectation there for X, Y, and Z. Is that what I want to be a part of? I'm going to tell you right now, if people were to go to our website, look at the diversity equity work we do, and if that's not an area of comfort for somebody, for some reason they don't want to be a part of that kind of conversation, I think they're going to learn pretty quickly that might not be the place for me. And likewise, if that is something really important to somebody, they're likely to learn that's the kind of place that I'd like to go. We have that come up all the time in our final interview. I ask multiple questions about equity and inclusivity, and people often say, well, this is why I'm here, actually. I went to your website, and this is what you said. And when this happened, this is what your response was. That's what I want to be a part of, and that's why I'm sitting here today. So in a competitive job market, people need to recognize that you're lucky that people are choosing you too. So don't ignore that, cherish that, nurture that, and utilize that in the process.
That's a really powerful way of thinking as well, because I think a lot of times if you're in that interview process and maybe you aren't that right fit for that right job, but if you've had a positive experience with the school district, you're probably going to be more likely to apply for something else that may be a right fit. And so you've already established that relationship and you've nurtured that goodwill. Share a little bit more about that DE&I work that you said is actually one of the things that is drawing people to your district and one of the reasons that is setting you apart in getting those applications.
Well, first, I want to talk about some history. I mentioned that we have a large Jewish community here, but that only tells part of the story, right? In our area, we also have a large Muslim community. We have, I want to say this year it's 45 plus first languages being spoken in the district. We are about 66% Caucasian and 33 to 34% of many other races and people from different parts of the world, different backgrounds, experiences, faith traditions, etc. But that's historical here. That didn't just happen, although I will tell you it has grown in my 15 years here. That has increased, and our level of economic disparity within the district has increased as well. It's a little bit somewhat of an anomaly relative to what would typically be the profile of a district like ours. So, we have this melting spot, so to speak. I say so to speak because that's for a suburban district like ours. It's a very diverse place, not diverse relative to many urban districts. But it is a place where there's a lot of different people coming to the table. So the history for us around equity and inclusion isn't just the last couple of years. And I think that's important for us to keep thinking about, because we have a responsibility to those that have come before us who have done this work to acknowledge that. But also because I think it lends to the authenticity of the work and the fact that this isn't a fad. It isn't that something we decided to start to do because of progressive politics. It's not something that was just simply a response to the murder of George Floyd. However, it's been something that's been happening here for a long time. And that talking about it that way helps in the sense that we're always talking about building our capacity over a period of time, that this is long lasting and it's not something you need to do to check a box, but rather something that we think about as human beings as a framework for everything we do. So that's a little bit of the context. It did definitely ramp up with more calls to action over the years as we've experienced challenges in our community, challenges on a national level, and yes, post the murder of George Floyd, a stronger call to action relative to the work that we should be doing, and an acceleration of efforts for sure. But again, historically goes back before that period of time to having, first a district-wide committee. And then we've had committees in every building. We have a lens of equity and inclusion that fits over everything we do. We've, as a matter of fact, removed the equity lens from our strategic plan as a standalone priority area, and in fact, just infused it as the lens throughout every one of our priorities. So if you talk to us about a particular part of our organization, we're likely to start by talking to you about the equity lens that's being used in that aspect of the work. So That goes from academic rigor to the work that we're doing around hiring practices. Across the board, being culturally responsive and inclusive is just simply a part of everything we do and a part of every one of our decisions.
So speaking of those hiring practices, how does that give you some applications of where that is being seen in those hiring practices that you're speaking of?
Yeah, great question. So this is something we work on daily. We had multiple meetings this week, actually, as we're starting to gear up for hiring season about how this work will play out going into this year. A couple of the highlights. One, it's about reducing bias in the process. So in terms of the application process itself, being proactive, in fact, in trying to identify applicants we don't ask race, but specifically looking for applications that may indicate to an individual that there is an opportunity to diversify your staff. One of the ways we also do that, though, is by screening many, many, many candidates face-to-face via Zoom. I say face-to-face, not in person, but efficiency-wise via Zoom. We'll bring in lots of candidates, more than we ever did before. So instead of, for example, a teacher administrative opening where you may have 6 people come in, maybe you do interviews over a couple of days because you've got multiple openings and you bring in 14 or so people, whatever it might be. We'll bring in 20, 30, 40, 50 people via Zoom for brief screening interviews because you will quickly understand whether or not somebody may have qualities that are just not exhibited on the application. And if you're only reading an application, you'll bring a particular bias to it that we're trying to reduce. We also do training for all of the people involved in hiring, including all volunteers on interview committees in the area of unconscious bias and implicit bias to make sure we're reducing as much as we possibly can the application of those biases, acknowledging their existence, and then trying to eliminate them from the process. The questions we use, we analyze from that perspective. The behaviors and the analysis of the responses from applicants and those being interviewed. We've done everything we can to reduce bias in that analysis by using rubrics that we've had ahead of time, by really carefully thinking about all of the ways we approach looking at people and listening to their responses, and are we being as thoughtful as we possibly can in that regard. But that's like the most hands-on way of describing to you what we've done to improve our hiring practices. But I think the first step is you got to bring more people to the conversation. Got to advertise in different places. You've got to really go out, recruit people. We have a program with a local university where we have student teachers, specifically identified student teachers of color, work with us, and then we get to know them better. They get to know our environment better. We guarantee them an interview in the hiring process, and we are always hopeful that they will be successful. That is a very direct and proactive way we are looking to diversify our staff. So it's from bringing the right people to the table, making sure that in your process that there's an equal footing for everybody. You're trying to overcome those biases, but really pushing hard on that idea of, how can we make sure that our staff better represents the kids that they're working with.
And I know that you said that this is something that your district has been doing for a while, so it may be a little bit more like common practice for you at this point. But what are some recommendations that you have for districts wanting to embark in this similar work, but may face some challenges in the initial bringing everybody to the table and getting, because it is definitely something that I know some districts struggle with as far as getting alignment on?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say buckle up, right? Like, you just have the courage and be prepared for the conversation. And it's going to happen. There are people in our world today, unfortunately, that do not see this as a priority, and they struggle in the conversation, and they will be critical. And depending on the district, more or less people will question this conversation. The entire diversity conversation is challenging at times for loads of reasons. One of which is you're in some ways asking the skeptics to perhaps be reflective and question who they are as a human being and what they bring to the table in terms of their own bias. And that's hard for human beings to acknowledge that perhaps they are not as equitable as they think they are. And helping people understand that, they have a bias, it exists. And how do we make sure that it doesn't find its way into our decision-making and our practice and our treatment of other human beings, and that we're really doing our best to be better, empathetic human beings that reach out to other people. But that's getting to people's heart and soul, and that's where people get uncomfortable, they get feisty, and they get emotional and can be challenging. So get ready for that, be prepared, and find a way to make sure that as you're doing that, I like the expression I've heard other people use, calling people in as opposed to calling them out, right? Like, so your approaches, I think, also need to recognize that calling people out is not healthy. It doesn't help organizational change really embed itself or make progress as fast as we would like it to. And be aware of that, be cognizant of that, be thoughtful about that. I don't think kids or human beings should suffer while we make other people comfortable, but I also think that there's a balance between making people uncomfortable in ways that could be hurtful and then reduce our ability to make change, or invite people in ways that will help them in a safer way make change more quickly and more deeply and more authentic. That's number one. Number two, build capacity with people. Really teach them. You've got to understand the power of professional development, helping people understand what other folks' experience might be in the world. We've done that in a variety of ways. We've had panels of kids say, when you say this is how it makes me feel. But be open to that conversation and really create a vulnerable, open space where you're asking people to tell you more and be open to their feedback. And then drive your work based on that feedback. We know one of the ways you retain people longer and more deeply is if you're creating an environment, one, that they want to come to, but two, that they want to stay in. So be open to the feedback, ask for feedback, and just be thoughtful about that work and inclusive.
Now, this all plays into building that culture of trust and support that you have mentioned. What are some other actionable recommendations that you have for K-12 leaders during the hiring and even the onboarding experience to build that culture and to build those relationships?
I think be upfront with people right from the beginning. We communicate to folks, here are our core values and beliefs. Here's what the mission of the district is. Here's what our vision is. We really want you to push us in that thinking. We want to hire people that are smarter, faster, stronger than us to push our thinking and be open to that. Involve people in leadership early on. Get them engaged in the decision-making process and collaborating with their peers. There's two authors I'm very fond of, Fullen and Hargraves, who write quite a bit about putting people in collaborative spaces and the power that has to really make organizational change happen, but where it creates far better job satisfaction for people when they're collaborating with other human beings. I think that's really important. But I think it's just about developing, leadership to employee relationships that are positive and collaborative and the power of more people making decisions. I'll also say it's about hiring the right leaders. So we have a team that I think hands down is better than anybody at being kind, being thoughtful, being supportive, and being honest with people about performance and what needs to happen next, and then working closely with them to make that happen. And I think finally, it's about making sure you're standing up for what is right. We talked a little bit about the notion of how difficult some of these conversations might be and might be in communities. Well, you got to have the courage to stand up and defend people too. And we've had experiences where some of our work may have been questioned, particularly from the DEI perspective, negatively questioned by those that don't see the need for a culturally responsive lens or inclusivity or celebrating and embracing diversity. And I think if you're asking staff members to take risks, to think differently about the work, to reimagine their work with that lens, you've got to really be willing to stand up then and defend their work and defend it vigorously, quickly, and very positively. I think there's really should be little doubt, I'm sure, in our teaching staff. I'm sure that things aren't perfect all the time, but I'm fairly confident that the people here would say they know that they will be defended when they're doing this work, and they'll be supported when doing this work without question.
That goes along with something that you had mentioned before, is showing up for your staff, and they want to feel as if they want to know they've got your backing and that they've got backup. How else? I know we talked a little bit about this offline, but some other ways of showing up for your staff and creating that culture. You've mentioned intentionality and also flexibility. Can you speak to those points and how those have yielded positive results in your recruitment and retention efforts?
Sure. Well, I think intentionality in our work is super important. And, creating a work environment that is predictable, is safe, is comfortable, is thoughtful, is strategic, really important, right? Like humans don't do well with sharp right turns. They just don't. I don't think they do well in relationships with sudden change. I don't think people generally are really comfortable with nonstop chaos and change. I think educators in particular over the past decade, at least in the state of New York, have experienced an unbelievable amount of sharp turns and, discombobulation. We had a period of time here, whether it was, race to the top, performance review of teachers being based on test scores, the implementation of Common Core curriculum, the quick implementation of a curriculum not tied well to a state testing system and kind of thoughtfully rolled out. By the way, I would say as policy initiatives, a lot of good in all of that, and a lot that I would personally support and support on an intellectual level. However, in terms of the building of capacity over time, thoughtfulness in that change process, implementation in a thoughtful, strategic way, there are ways that I think that could have been done differently. Now, hindsight's 2020, but what we know about human beings, to get back to the point, is sudden, quick change is not always great for long-lasting implementation success. And so I think intentionality in the organization that we probably best demonstrate through our strategic planning process, it's called our blueprint, is really, really important. Staff know where we're going. They know that we are studying particular aspects of the work, that we are implementing in other areas, and that we are exploring potential implementation in other areas. They know exactly what the priorities are. They know exactly what the action steps are every year, and they know exactly what will be driving the budget in terms of that plan as well. It is not a mystery to anybody. And I think providing that comfort and being intentional in that work is really important. They also know that they'll have the opportunity to weigh in on that and be a part of our strategic planning process. So we bring a lot of people to the table every year to drive that. We hold ourselves accountable constantly. And I call it small a accountability, not capital A. It's not the accountability systems from across the country with test scores, although we talk quite a bit about our graduation rate and closing gaps for kids. It is, though, about constantly reporting out and communicating what we are doing relative to that plan throughout the year and acknowledging where we've gotten something done and where we still need it to get work done. So our committees, the backbone, the through thread through all of our work is that particular plan. The committees are all driven by the plan said this committee is going to explore this topic. Now, after that, a lot of intellectual freedom to go in different directions and explore that. We really recognize that we need people then at the table to help make those decisions. But it is all driven by that strategic plan. And I think that is really important, creating an environment of certainty, of comfort, of safety in an environment where standards changed and, systems changed. And then the pandemic happened and lots of lack of predictability. So that has been really, really important to us as well. And there was a second part to your question after intentionality that you asked me about.
Yeah, no worries. But before we go there, that just makes me think of how after the pandemic and after so many social issues they all seem to converge really in the last 3 years. And educators were praised, honestly, for their adaptability. But then it almost became, okay, well, they've taken it this long, so they can handle it. But that's not how you're going to retain them. That's not how you're going to show value to these strong, resilient people that are obviously doing the work they love. So I love hearing you say, instead of taking that mindset, let's provide them the structure and be intentional about these different procedures and how they can also be part of the ongoing strategy of the rest of the district. I think that's huge and probably a mindset shift that would benefit a lot of communities.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And we do have lots of conversations with people outside of our district and throughout the state. And we've been really blessed to be a part of that conversation with others about strategic planning. and about what that could look like in their district and how they can make that happen. And that's something that many, many, many of my colleagues have been interested in learning more about and talking about, and something that we've been able to share with others, and really excited about that as well through our state group and individually. It's been something that we've really connected with other people on, that notion of being intentional in your districts and setting up your work based on a really well-defined mission, vision, and what your core values are. And then every year identifying these are our priorities. And frankly, it's not that complex. This is what we're going to do about it. These are the tasks we're going to accomplish, and this is who's going to do it and when they're going to do it. And then communicating about that. And that other piece that we're going to get to is about flexibility. As far as an employer, how are you being flexible with people? So there's the rigidity, so to speak, and kind of use the air quotes on rigidity of a strategic plan that keeps you focused and not implementing all different spaces without capitalizing on the investment and being strategic K through 12 and causing those right turns. But there's also the flexibility with people as an individual to say, okay, help us understand, how would that work differently for you? And how could you make that happen? And understanding that we want to honor intellectual freedom and intellectual capacity in the district and people's craft as artists, as educators who are artists. How do they make that look a little bit different? And then allow them that. And then there's the flexibility just simply as an employee. So it is exceedingly rare that we are turning down somebody who has requested a personal day that doesn't quite fit within what were the traditional rules or even the contractual limitations of that. We are really cognizant of the different challenges people are experiencing in their lives, their needs, their desire to find balance in their life. And we want to honor that. Now, that doesn't make it a free-for-all. It's disrespectful of taxpayer resources in any way, shape, or form. It's just acknowledging professionals in the ways that we can work better and smarter and differently by being flexible with people as well. So we think a lot about that. And frankly, schools are a tremendously inflexible environment because you have 3,600 kids that are at your doorstep every day. So you can't decide to have a lot of opportunities for remote work or sabbaticals, things that really can be tricky. But where you can, finding a way to be flexible with people, I think is important.
Do you have any specific examples that you could provide about flexibility that you can offer or that others might be able to offer in their districts?
I think it's just about being human. So yes, there's the personal day request, but then there's the person who says, hey, listen, I've got a dentist appointment and we run a little late. Can we flex my schedule a little bit and this person covers so that we can manage that? And, there are very traditional environments where people say, nope, this is what it is. You got to take a day, got to take time. I don't know that helps. One, nobody has a gigantic capacity relative to substitute teachers to be doing that.
Right.
But I also think that that's not realistic relative to what human beings are hoping for in the workforce these days. I think they really would prefer their supervisors to say, yeah, no problem. We can make that work. Let's say make that happen. Because frankly, we're expecting the person's going to be flexible for 20 minutes after school and stay with a student who needs extra help, or whose parent is late picking them up, or who has other life circumstances. Well, the same life circumstances we're asking them to accommodate with the people that they are serving, they have in their own life, likely as parents and caregivers themselves. So I think we should just be thinking about that in everything we do. How would I want to be treated as an employee? And I find that the more you give, the more you get. Big time.
I love the way you put that. I know you're also intentional about providing those ongoing resources, and you mentioned PD earlier, but I think so many districts obviously have to. I mean, there's going to be professional development opportunities, but the ones that really decide this is what we're going to do, and these are the types of opportunities we're going to offer, and that's just the way it is. It's really set themselves apart, and I think make their employees, prospective and current, feel really valued and also know that this is where I want to continue to grow my career. Not just, hey, where can I find another opportunity to grow, perhaps outside? So how is Brighton intentional in that regard in creating those custom support models for their prospective and current employees?
So a couple different ways. One, we have a regular professional development system that's probably pretty traditional, looks like what most people would experience in terms of superintendent conference days, and the regular delivery of that. We also have a teacher center in district, and that teacher center provides multitude of courses and professional development opportunities for people both remotely and in person, and sponsors quite a bit that way. Our staff meetings have turned into professional development opportunities as well. We have a mentor program, a formal mentor program, and then we have a support program where if somebody needs something a little different beyond just a mentoring program, we can design a different kind of system and have some contractual arrangements to create that for somebody, almost like mentoring light, so to speak, or different kinds of experiences that are really directed and tailored specifically towards the needs of that individual. Really everywhere you look in our district, we're finding support for people in different ways, both formal and informal, really thinking about how to grow and develop people in every way, and not just kind of leaving it as, hey, well, we hired you, now you have to figure it out. We don't look at it that way at all.
Right. I like to say, you can't just drop them like a hot potato once they've gone ahead and signed on the dotted line. So those opportunities, obviously it's important that they exist, but how do you communicate that to your new hires? Because that's what's key in making sure they know that they're going to be supported, right?
Right. So we do a new staff member orientation when people begin with us and communicate through that. That's actually entirely run by the teacher center as well. But then it's through the induction and the mentor teacher program where people really learn quite a bit about that. And then they just receive lots of communication all the time from their principals, from the assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction, and from the teacher center about these opportunities.
Nice. So you've given some amazing examples of recruitment strategies, including, again, these professional development opportunities, but to attract those folks in the first place, I know schools and districts need to market such important elements as their employee value proposition. How does Brighton, in addition to the ways you just mentioned, but promote these in its recruitment efforts? Is it your careers page? Is it going out into the community? What has been sort of, I guess, your main three that are really the must-haves in making sure that folks know about these key employee value proposition points?
So I don't know actually that we do enough to promote them, to be candid, but I think part of it is by word of mouth. So I think that we have developed a reputation, and people talk. I mean, in education circles, they are often very well connected through their preparation program, either master's or bachelor's level. I think it's pretty well known in the field what you are doing or not doing and how well people are supported or not supported. One of the ways that happens, though, too, is that we hire a lot of people with experience, not exclusively, but a lot of people with experience. And part of the reason for that is they follow us, they connect with colleagues in a similar content or teaching area, and then, come to the table saying, I wanted to be here. I'm coming to you because even though I've got 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10, 15 years experience somewhere else, I'm coming to you because you do X, Y, and Z. So they learn that from other people. I do believe a lot of the information is available on the website. I do know that in the interview process, when we are discussing with people, what it would be like to work here, we look at the interview process as not just asking questions, but giving information. Sometimes you give a lot of information through your questions. So we give a lot of overviews to people. And I know just having information available when people call and inquire about the job has been really important too. Again, we have great people here who have worked together for a long time. So our teacher center director, our HR people, all of them have been on board for a very long time, so they can speak with a lot of expertise about the work that we're doing.
I think that really plays into the idea of just having ambassadors for your brand ambassadors, like the folks who are going to be sharing word of mouth, whether it's by person to person or on social media, which was where a lot of word of mouth happens these days. They are going to be sharing your message, and it's because of the fact that you're living it every day and you're living that culture. So I would say you also have brand ambassadors as well.
There you go.
So before we head out, I would like to ask you a question that we end on every one of our podcasts the same way. If you could wave a magic wand, what is one thing you would fix in education?
Intentionality relative to individualized instruction. which really ties into a bigger picture. This is my way of making 3 wishes 6, but resources, right? So it is, our systems are designed to be the large, institutionalized, educate a lot of kids and take advantage of scale, because it's very difficult to individualize for every individual human. The problem is that translates in a lot of quarters to educating the neurotypical, very candidly, the moderately to exceptionally affluent Caucasian student without learning difficulties or exceptional challenges, who comes to the table with a lot of capacity and family support. Fine. I say fine because, the impact of educators is significant, but kids are coming with a lot. And across our country, the greatest difficulty, the greatest challenge are for kids who have less, who come from marginalized populations, don't have the same capacity, families that may not have the same capacity over time. And we apply a lot of one-size-fits-all solutions. And, thinking very carefully about the impact of our work on different populations and inclusivity in every way, from gender and sexuality, race, color, creed. It is often important to think about individualized instruction, and the needs are different. As a father of 3, my 3 kids, sure, they have a lot of similarities. They're raised in the same house by the same 2 people, but they also have really, really fascinating and cool individual interests and gifts and talents and experiences. And I'd love for our schools to look at every child as an individual as much as they possibly can and create the right experience for every individual child that really maximizes this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them to grow, develop as learners, as leaders, their heart, their soul, their mind, and contributors to our communities. I think if we can do that and keep working on that, because a lot of people are, this is everywhere. People are seeking to do that, I think, every day in their classrooms. I think we'll be way better off.
I could definitely get behind that wish. So I'll grant it if I had a magic wand.
Fantastic. I think it's happening. Appreciate it, Molly.
Thank you. And if anyone needs to find you, are you presenting anywhere soon coming up, either at AASA or elsewhere?
Yeah, actually, I will be. I'll be presenting at AASA about strategic planning, about our blueprint planning and that notion of intentionality. So I would love to connect with people. We're in some of the roundtable sessions, myself and a colleague, the president of the New York State Council of School Superintendents, who does quite a bit of this work in his own district, and a lot of mission vision work through Solution Tree as well around professional learning communities. Dr. Jason Andrews, good friend of mine and a close colleague. So we would love to meet with more people, talk about that, and have an opportunity to engage with more human beings, because frankly, every time we do, we learn quite a bit about the work that we can be doing differently in our district as well.
Well, excellent. I will share that information and where everybody can find you on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. Thank you again, Dr. McGowan, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure, Molly. Thanks for creating a great conversation.